the highlight of the phone call was that Trump spoke to Xi first, President Xi Jinping first, and later followed by Takaichi. So that the series of the approach of the phone calls is quite telling. That his probably preference over a trade deal and his trade deal conclusion, a successful trade deal conclusion, and there were reports that he had asked Takaichi to tone down the rhetoric, because the U.S. still maintains strategic ambiguity as far as it comes to Taiwan.
You're watching The Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Our very, very special guest today is Dr. Gaurav Dutta, who is an independent researcher who has worked as a consultant for the Ministry of External Affairs and as a research associate at the National Maritime Foundation. His research interests include Japan's foreign policy, East Asian security, and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. And we are going to be talking about the escalating row between China and Japan after Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told Japanese lawmakers on November 7th that a Chinese attack on Taiwan, threatening Japan's survival, could trigger a military response. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dutta. It's a delight to have you with us.
Pleasure is mine.
So let's take it right from the top. Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks, which sparked this whole response, seems to have escalated into a very vicious kind of a situation between the two countries, with both countries warning citizens in each other's countries to step up safety. And I believe China's Consul General in Osaka, Shu Jian, even posted a tweet which showed the Prime Minister Takaichi being beheaded, and which he later withdrew. What is this whole row all about? If you could just put it into perspective for us.
Well, yes, I think what Takaichi was commenting on was a hypothetical situation, and that was she was answering a question in the parliament. But the standpoint, the point that stood out was that previous prime ministers have always taken a more cautious position, or never, uttering the proposition on a, on Taiwan emergency, but they have maintained strategic ambiguity on that point. However, this was probably a first time by a Japanese prime minister during a parliament session, and while she had made the statement. But again, the statement was as per the 2050 Peace and Security legislation of Japan, under which one of these issues as survival threatening situation has been mentioned. And it was consistent with that aspect, with that point of the legislation. However, although it is on paper, it was never uttered by a sitting Japanese prime minister who was in power at that point of time. Abe and Taro Aso, former Japanese prime ministers, had mentioned it, but only when they were not in power, when they were never sitting Japanese prime ministers. And they had done it, Abe had done it at a think tank event in Taiwan. And Kishida, former prime minister, also avoided a similar question during a parliament hearing, and he maintained strategic ambiguity. So therefore, it provoked China, because it was during a parliament session, and you were mentioning, and Taiwan is something that is a red line for China. When you cross a red line, I think it invokes a very vicious and a vehement reaction, I think, and that probably is the primary cause of China's anger.
So let me just get this straight. From what I understand, Prime Minister Takaichi actually said that Chinese military blockade of Taiwan would be a survival-threatening situation for Japan and grounds for collective self-defense. And which, as you just said, is a rare provision in Japan's sort of pacifist constitution, which will permit the use of force in defense of an ally. In this case, U.S. forces coming to Taiwan's aid. Is that correct?
Yes, I think when you look at, with the comments, I think it has been blown out of proportions. I think the vicious reaction or the the Chinese side Beijing has been very provoked by the statement. But in reality, if you look at it, there is very little Japan can do by force. At the max, as per their legislation, they can only provide logistic support to the American troops. However, they cannot use their force for offensive purposes on a foreign territory. As per the current legislation, they still cannot do that. So they have their limitations on that ground. If you look at, that's a limitation that Japan has. They still cannot deploy their forces on a foreign territory. At the max,
Right.
if Japan's main territory is attacked, that's when they can defend. That is the minimum thing that they have. So at the max, they are, it's mostly for self-defense purposes. Only if it is an attack on their territory. So Taiwan probably is a survival threatening situation, but it can be also indicative of the fact that, to show a bold stance towards China's probably maritime, assertion that they have been doing over the years. And the debate on the survival threatening situation is nothing new. It is a decade-old, I think, debate that has been going within Japan, and the people are also aware of the situation, and people have been debating it. So therefore, I think probably Takaichi's mistake was, uttering it in the parliament, not realizing how hard the blowback would be. And she was quick enough to, dispatch an envoy to China, a top diplomat in China from the Asia and Oceania Affairs Bureau. But at that point of time, I think China took the signaling as, that China is teaching a lesson to Japan of its mistakes and should know its place. And, the optics were pretty much visible on the newspapers.
Do you think that this could possibly also be a message going out from the Prime Minister to Trump, with whom she recently had a meeting, that, we are your ally and that we're ready here to help? Do you think that messaging is part of the reason why she brought this up?
Yes, this is one of the reasons that was cited by a lot of the Chinese experts. A lot of Chinese experts say that after the meeting with Trump on the U.S. aircraft carrier, she felt, that she was doing this at the behest of the U.S. And I think most of the Chinese experts were, assuming that she was doing this at the behest of the U.S. and feeling more emboldened, and that triggered, this probably Taiwan reunification with the mainland China is a core national interest of China, and emboldening and of Japan, and probably potentially going past its security legislation would threaten China's or normalization of Japan as a normal power would threaten China's regional interest. So therefore, I think they felt most of the Chinese observers have felt that this was probably Takaichi was probably doing it at the behest of the U.S. But then again, for the Japanese, I think they had a phone call with Trump, and the highlight of the phone call was that Trump spoke to Xi first, President Xi Jinping first, and later followed by Takaichi. So that the series of the approach of the phone calls, is quite telling. That his probably preference over a trade deal and his trade deal conclusion, a successful trade deal conclusion. And there were reports that he had asked Takaichi to tone down the rhetoric, because the U.S. still maintains strategic ambiguity as far as it comes to Taiwan. So from the Japanese side, there was again I think worrying. They were pretty worried. Some officials were worried about how Trump had approached it. But this was later again. The report was denied by Japanese officials. The Wall Street Journal report, I think, was denied later by their chief cabinet secretary.
Before we sort of go back to this ambiguity and all that thing that is being shown right now, could you just elaborate a little bit on the sort of historic tensions that prevail between the two countries? Because I remember that there's a warning that's been issued that people in Japan, the Japanese in China, should be careful, particularly on the what is it called, the Nanjing massacre and things like that. Could you just elaborate a little on these tensions? And despite the fact, how do you account for the fact that both countries are incredibly large trading partners?
That's right. I think if you look at the imposition of historical past and invoking nationalism within China, and I think the Communist Party, has invoked. The last it was as vicious as this was in 2010 during the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, as the Chinese call it. the islands was privatized. It was nationalized. It was a private island owned by a private person, and then I think it was nationalized. And then there was, a vehement protest and historic, there was references to historical past. So this, I think, while it does have an element in its, in China's psyche because of what Japan had done of its militarist past during the Second World War, but at the same time, China uses it as a strategic tool to, foment nationalism, and also to get at the time right now when China is, also struggling economically. It is also to muster support from the public and for the Communist Party to have a strong to show itself as a strong strong power to and probably against Japan, and so that that they have had a positive effect on lowering the temper or the bold positions that Japan has been probably taking. So yes, in the past they have done similar. I think in 2010 it was more violent. There was violences against Japanese businesses in China, and currently, even at the moment, right now, I think the Nanjing massacre, where I feel the Chinese feel that Japan has not, done enough of, accepted the incident as much. But I think Japan has also made with the Murayama statement, where they have made multiple references in the past of what had the apologies in different ways. But I feel at the same time, it plays into the psyche. Also, it's an effective tool for nationalism and to show more credibility on their part.
But right now, I think, they're already having issues about what you said, the disputed Daegu and Senkaku Islands with some Chinese Coast Guard vessel entering the area, and the Japanese in turn stepping up their responses. But before that, I was looking at some numbers just before our discussion here, and I read this rather interesting statement which said that Takaichi's proposal to further raise defense spending to 2% of Japan's GDP is supported by 60.4% of those polled, while 34.7% are opposed. However, Japanese opinion is more divided on whether to exercise collective self-defense in the event of a Taiwan conflict, with 48% in favor and 44% opposed to it. I mean, where does this dichotomy come from?
Well, I think if you look at the past polls for Taiwan contingency, I think right now I think the figures are quite divided, I would say. But if you compare it to the previous polls, I think there is a significant increase. There was a poll that was done, I think, a few years back, and I think the figures were much lower.
Okay.
So this shows a significant shift that has been underway, and that indicates that there is a higher sensitization, probably amongst the Japanese public, of a Taiwan, contingency. For I think they had put up also, let's say, with the defense build-up, I think they had put up, following Takaichi's statement, Japan is not, backing out, whereas China is pushing for a full retractment of her statement, and that is where they're. I think they're at loggerheads right now, and neither side is trying to back out, and South Korea coming in between. South Korean president, South Korean president, suggesting that being an intimidator and not the temper not run too high. So, but I think with Takaichi's conservative, I think her faction belonging to the conservative faction, I think it doesn't seem like she'll be willing to back out at the moment. Whereas for Beijing, even any they push so far, and if they don't get a retractment, it puts Beijing also at a spot. That if you've lost, they don't want to see themselves losing out to Japan. So that may pose a big credibility question to the leadership in Beijing.
But business-wise, I believe that the recent conflict has led to a lot of business losses, mainly for the Japanese, in terms of Chinese tourists, Chinese business interests. How big are those? I mean, how big a impact will that have?
Yes, currently I think there were estimates that I think by a research institute called Nomura Research Institute, the losses could, the travel cancellations And I think Chinese inbound tourism composes 27% of inbound tourism. And Chinese tourists, I think, are mostly affecting the Kansai region of Japan. That means the Western Japan, that includes Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, the cities of Kobe. So these were the cities, the metropolis, the big metropolis. I think they were mostly affected by the tourism cancellations. But the important point to note here is that the cancellations have been made only till December 2025. The
Okay.
cancellations are not imposed from January next year. So
Oh,
yes, there's uncertainty there, whereas Japanese businesses are hoping that it will rebound. But if you look at tourism on the eastern side of Japan, it's called Tohoku, it's on the eastern side, uh, and that part is pretty much unaffected. Because the major chunk of Chinese inbound tourists are mostly towards the Western Japan area, and whereas and then Tokyo as well, but Tokyo comes into the region called Kanto. So
right.
and then I think on the eastern side, Tohoku area, I think it's pretty much unaffected. I mean, they have what Japan have also done is they have diversified the tourists from other parts, that is one way to look at it. And let's see if China wants to impose the cancellations beyond December, because for Chinese tourists, Japan is still a very popular destination, and not a lot of people would like to cancel it. Also, especially among the younger generation.
Right. So, if you go back to our earlier question, there was a Japanese analyst whom I had interviewed a couple of years ago, and he said that the issue is that we are not quite sure whether an attack on Taiwan necessarily means an attack on Japan, although that is likely to be the case. But more importantly, it is a question of not being seen as being used as a staging ground for U.S. interests, if you know what I'm trying to say, that that the Americans come and keep dumping more missiles and more weapons on us just for use in case of, and we don't want the Chinese to think that we are just a platform for their interests. Is that a right assessment?
Well, I think for Taiwan, I think the survival threatening, fact, I think, was made primarily because control of Taiwan probably could also blockade their shipments. Japan's shipments around Taiwan Strait, around 90 to 80% of their imports, and a lot of the energy imports that originates all the way from West Asia or the Middle East. It flows their energy imports, and that could probably. I mean, they have a sense of a threat that it could So there are two. I mean, the point you have raised it also is a valid point, but at the same time, there are also inhibitions in Japan, in the Japanese strategic community, that if that could happen, if China could probably get hold of Taiwan, it could affect or use it as a leverage for imposing, or as a leverage on Japan, on by blockading. It could probably pose as a point for blockading their energy shipments. Yeah.
So, with both sides sort of hardening positions and escalating warnings and all that, do you think a new sort of a dangerous new front is opened in Asia's most volatile waters right now?
Well, I think right now, I think the comments have been mostly, it's been high on rhetoric, and all the action that the Chinese side has been taking one is by maritime coercions, is by intruding into Japanese territory to coerce, and also the most important tool here has been the economic tool,
Of
the
course.
economic sanctions. Yes, I mean, a lot of people are focusing on tourism, but not many people are looking at seafood industry. They also banned seafood industry because a lot of a big section of Japan's seafood market was in China, and this was pre the Fukushima disaster. And then I think after the Fukushima disaster, I think China was unwilling to take a lot of their seafood, and now I think the China has just allowed recently they had allowed the re-entry of Japanese seafood in the Japanese market, into the Chinese market, and they were getting a foothold for the Japanese businesses. And now again they banned it, and they said that they will not find any market unless Takaichi retracts her statement. So that will probably have a big impact on the fishermen, because they were just about to start off. They were already struggling, and they were about to find employment. And those fishing manufacturing manufacturers would have a lot of problems with the production companies would have a lot of problem resuming businesses with China. Surprisingly, now with Taiwan has in response has given an open door to Japanese seafood exports, where Taiwan had also
Right.
imposed restrictions on Japan for a long time. And now I think Taiwan has opened doors, like that you can send your seafood exports back into Taiwan. So that isn't one alternative, but I don't know if that market will be as large as China's. So that is one question. So if that is a possibility of opening as a third front, it depends on how they would like to steer the situation. And I think U.S. would be a critical actor here, because of how critical U.S. is for its Japanese foreign policy. U.S. remains at the cornerstone of Japanese foreign policy. So it will have to be done in coordination with the U.S. And I don't, with the current Trump administration, I don't see he would like any wars or any sort of conflicts breaking out. So I don't see that as one likely front opening up on a military conflict as such. Yes.
I think you put the whole sort of conflict right now that's going on into a very understandable kind of a parameter. But let me close this interview with a last question, which says that there's a recent Australian report which says that the spat has placed India in a delicate position, exposing ambiguity in New Delhi's approach. And I'll just read out what it says. It says that, India remains unsure about how firmly it should articulate its stance on Taiwan, how far it is prepared to align with Japan against China, and where it fits within the US's evolving China strategy. What are your views on that?
Yes, I think for India's stance on Taiwan, I think India has maintained its one China policy, and I don't think that has changed. But I think the last incident, if I am to take the reference, was during Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and I think that had raised the issue and the tensions of a potential, and then I think the questions were, I think, raised to India at that point of time, and India maintained that I think India's one China policy is consistent and does not need any reiteration as such. But India stated that it should respect sovereignty, the status quo, and should not have any use of force as such. So I believe India has taken a principle. I think its principles remains. I think its principles are intact. There's no change as such. I think Japan has maintained a similar position, but it is also to indicate that there should not be any forceful, coercive measures for changing the status quo here. But it does put a test for India-Japan partnership. I think India-Japan partnerships faced a test also during the Galwan crisis, and Japan had limitations as well at that point of time, and they did show support. They did indicate support. So India might have to do on that front. Maybe India might have to, so maybe if push comes to shove, if it gets very hot, then maybe India will have to give a similar sort of statement. But there is not. So that is one aspect. Then I think that that raises big questions on the India-Japan partnership as a whole. So I think there are limitations, but on that front, I think India has maintained, and also India has also, I think, there has been a rapprochement between India and China at the moment with resumption of flights. But then again, this issue coming, complicates. And very recently with the, I think with the Arunachal issue with the Chinese Foreign Ministry reiterating that, and again, complicating, all the rapprochement that was, developed and is getting under stress at the moment. So it might come under stress again. But at the same time, I think these are complications that both India and Japan has, and I think both sides recognize it and their limitations. But I think I think I think there are if I think there I mean that I shouldn't suggest that that is some I mean there's not much substance in the bilateral relationship between India and Japan. There's still a lot of substance, I think, but yes, there is ambiguity and on that front, on the Taiwan front. So yeah. And I think it's the same for Japan when it comes to India's core interest as well. So it goes both ways, and both are, both understand that matter very well.
On that note, I will have to close this particular interview because we ran out of time. I appreciate you taking time out for this, and I look forward to having you with us again. Stay online. I'll come back to you in a second again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Gaurav Dutta, who's an expert on East Asian security and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, explaining the recent spat between Tokyo and Beijing over the remarks made by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to seeing you again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta.